Welcome to the Sisters in Crime Writers Podcast. Everyone has a unique writing journey, so join us for conversations about those journeys from the writers themselves. This is Julie Henricus, the Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and I am delighted to welcome P.M. Raymond to the podcast this week. P.M. Raymond is an award-winning author from New Orleans who knows a thing or two about good gumbo, grits, and café au lait. She's a 2025 Killer Shorts Screenplay and Horror to Comic Semifinalist, the Sisters in Crime 2024 Eleanor Taylor Bland Award winner, and 2024 Claymore Award and Killer Shorts Screenplay finalist. She was named to the 160 Black Women in Horror in 2023. Her interconnected short story collection, Things Are As They Should Be and Other Worlds to Die For, will be released in April 2026 from Uncomfortably Dark Horror. Her work has appeared in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Writer's Digest, Punk Noir, Flash Fiction Magazine, Kings River Life Magazine, The Furious Gazelle, and Dark Yonder, among others. P.M. Raymond, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to do this.
Well, I'm super excited to talk to you because there are so many things to talk about. But let's start where I always start. When did you say to yourself, I want to be a writer?
Well, I think like most writers, I've always kind of written off and on throughout my life. Mostly it was in furtherance of whatever position I was in, and I was usually in a marketing position. So writing a lot of ad copy, press releases, things like that. And then when I relocated to North Carolina, I came here as an adult, and I didn't know anyone except for my sister. And I wanted to try to find community. So I looked through all of the different listings in Meetup, and one of them was Triangle Sisters in Crime. So I was like, oh, I've always enjoyed writing. And it seemed like such a, the way the write-up was, I think they were having some people in to talk about maybe PR or something. And I thought, well, that's up my alley. So I ended up attending that meeting, and Karen Pullen and Sarah E. Johnson, I really credit them with being, so welcoming to me when I first attended those meetings. And they were two of the reasons why I continued to, because I just felt like I had a place there. And especially when I walked in a room where I was the only person of color, to feel like, I actually belonged there. Like I had a right to be in that space. And so I just started attending those meetings. And initially I felt like, well, this particular chapter very much focuses on, I shouldn't say focuses on, a lot of writers are involved in cozies. A lot of writers are involved in traditional mystery. And I thought, okay, well, I should try my hand at writing a cozy. And that's when I started really thinking about it. And then the chapter had a anthology that came out, and I submitted to it and was accepted. So it was like my first time that anything I'd written had commercial value outside of my work efforts. So that was the first time that I kind of was a little bit hooked on. I'm like, well, I don't want this to be the only story I've ever had anybody have any interest in. So then I had to keep writing. I couldn't have that one story. So that's kind of spurred me on. That challenged me.
Well, so I love what you're talking about with chapters and also the need to find community in a community of writers. And I think sometimes Sisters in Crime has the reputation of being a cozy writer only, but it isn't. There are other writers, and other paths, and so many people benefit from learning about writing and craft and everything, no matter what genre you're writing in. You talk to me about the turn towards horror. I mean, was your first story cozy, and then you're like, oh, this would be a lot more fun if.
Yeah, actually, the first story I ever had published with that anthology was quite a dark suspense story. It involved a chainsaw, I like to say, involved a chainsaw and two buddies who had a disagreement. I mean, so um, it was definitely on the a little bit on the darker side. I've always been a fan of horror. It's
Mhm.
always been the genre that I've loved the most, and I think everyone who's ever been in horror at some point came to it or became involved in it because of Stephen King or Peter Straub, Clive Barker, those bigger writers. So yeah, when I was, younger, I had no business reading Stephen King, but my parents, I came from a gentler time where my parents didn't really watch what we were doing. You just came home and the
Yeah.
street lights came on. I mean, they weren't watching anything in between. So I got a lot of horror in that way. And so I've always been a fan of it. But I think what Sisters in Crime did for me was it gave me appreciation for cozies. It gave me appreciation for mysteries, which that wasn't really what I read. Now I definitely read in those genres. And I actually, look for books to temper the horror that I read. I always feel like you need to have a palate cleanser. And sometimes that nice cozy is a palate cleanser just to make you know that things are right in the world. But I've always been a horror fan, always read horror, always been a horror genre movie fan. So for me, I came into it already like that. And it was actually the affiliation with Sisters in Crime that actually opened me up to other genres.
Well, let's talk about horror a little bit. First of all, so many people are mashing different genres up right now, and horror and romance, or horror and mystery, or horror is are some of the mashups. Horror is having a moment. Not that the moment ever wasn't there, but it's really having a moment. And somebody explained to me or suggested to me that it's because when you're dealing with challenging times, horror is a way to say, oh, but it could be worse. So it kind of soothes your soul and like, oh, but it could be worse. Um, do you tell me about what you think the draw of horror is?
Yeah, I would agree that horror is having a moment outside the genre. The genre
Yeah,
itself has always been strong, always
huge.
had a very strong fan base. People always, had an appetite for it who are in the know. But outside of it, I think it is having a moment because people, like you said, they're doing genre mashups. And I think even more than genre mashups, they are taking horror themes and refining them. And so you're getting movies like Get Out, which has commentary. You're
Yeah.
getting movies like Sinners. You're getting movies like Weapons.
Mhm.
That those are honestly, those are two of my favorite movies this year, Sinners and Weapons, and they're both horror movies, but they have a much wider message, and the way that they have executed them are
Mhm.
just so unique. And I think horror allows for that type of filmmaking as well as that type of writing.
Mhm.
And so I feel like, horror also is having a moment because the characters are more are wider ranging,
Yeah.
right? So you see Sinners and how it's contextualized history.
Yeah.
But in Weapons, you've got a female protagonist who's very unlikable sometimes. And I think, and that's okay because you see her as more of a complex character because you see that one side of her, then you see the other sides of her. And I think that's, one of the things that people are starting to understand is that there's a place for your Jason Voorhees and your Michael Myers. There's a place for those, and those are entertaining because those are so far fetched. I mean, that you can have fun enjoying that because that could never happen. But I think other films now are bringing in themes that are more grounded,
Mhm.
and so it helps you to work through some of those themes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know they're calling. I hate the term, so I don't like using it. But some of your listeners might know the term of having elevated horror, as if to say that other horror is, you know. download type of horror. I don't like using that term, but I get what they're saying. What they're basically saying is that the themes are more refined and they're taking on more of a psychological aspect as opposed to that visceral, physical aspect that you would see, say, in a slasher film.
I agree with you about terms like that. It's like literary mystery, as if
Yes.
other mysteries aren't well written. So I agree with you. I will say it is an interesting time about the complexity of movies like Sinners. Horror movies, I'm not good about watching. I'm going to admit this. I freak out. And my nieces love watching me freak out. Like they make me watch horror movies so they can see exactly
Yeah.
how to direct. But they are also like, Aunt Julie, we've got to watch Sinners because it's a great movie. It's a great movie, and you would
Yeah.
like it. You can have moments, but you would like it. So I think that's also that's what's interesting about this movement in a lot of ways, is that I'm not going to say it's more accessible, but you can approach it in different ways and on different levels and then get engrossed in the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about writing. Writing a short story is not easy. You have got 5,000 or less words to tell a story that needs to be contained. And sometimes, and I want to talk about your book that's coming out, the interconnected short stories, and how that came about. But it's a skill. Talk to me about developing that skill of writing short stories, because for so many people, that Sisters in Crime anthology is the first publication. I mean, it is a gateway towards, okay, now I've got a publishing credit. What else can I do?
Yeah.
Which is so exciting. But talk to me about the craft, because you're very gifted short story writer. So talk to me about that.
Sure. Well, thank you for the compliment. I would disagree, but I always have so much to learn. But I think part of the reason I gravitate towards short stories is because I do have a background in PR and marketing. So I'm used to writing things very short and to the point. For me, it's really hard to write a book. So, and for other people who I know who write books, like, "Ugh, I just can't write short stories. It's just so hard." But one of the things I think that, you're right. It can be really challenging to fit a complete story into a short story, but that's something people do need to understand. Short stories need to be a complete story in of themselves. They do need to have a, some kind of middle, beginning, end. It
Yeah.
looks a little bit different from a novel, but they still need to have some type of arc that happens. There needs to be stakes, unless you're writing something that's meant to be just completely a passive type of story. Although I don't know why I don't think people really like to enjoy reading things like that, but you do get people, it's like a very slow story. But I guess I will put it in the context of, say, horror or suspense and thriller, which is kind of what I write in. I want there to be stakes. There needs to be a certain amount of characters. And there's always these little things that you kind of, have to think about when you're doing a short story that you would change if it was a novel. Like a novel, generally, you wouldn't have just two characters. That'd be a long book if only two characters interacted. You can do it, but that takes a special type of skill to keep the tension and everything going. In short stories, yeah, 2 to 3 characters. I mean, I've been guilty of, there's a lot of characters in this story. It's just too many, or you need to make the story longer because there's too many and we don't really know what they're doing there and that kind of thing. So I think for me, when I'm thinking about approaching short stories, again, it's easier for me to do short stories because that's kind of my background in writing. But also I like just telling things that are quick and short and kind of pack a punch.
It's interesting you brought up your background in PR. I mean, because that's exactly what PR folks do, is they take this huge thing, this huge event or whatever, and then they find the kernel and write a 3-paragraph press release that's going to get everybody else excited about that huge thing. And that's a gift. Journalists have the same gift. It's or it's not a gift, it's a craft that you've
Yeah.
honed over time and that you become better at of, okay, here's the whole thing that happened. Here's how we're going to tell the story.
Yeah, and journalists can write really fast. Like the people that I know who have been journalists in the past, I'm like, how do you write so fast? It's because they're used to writing on deadlines, so they always write really fast. It's just a skill set that they have now, and they don't really turn that off. And
Yeah.
so I'm envious of how quickly they can write something. But that's because that's the environment they came from. You had to write something and it had to be written well, at least well enough to be able to, pass your editors. There's always an editor's muster. So same for me with PR. I'm like, I always had to write something really short. I didn't get pages and pages of time. If you're sending something to a newsroom, they're not going to read pages and pages. You get one page.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's two paragraphs, and then the details of the event. That's all you get. They don't give you more than that. They're not going to read a 2-page press release ever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So if they ever did, those days are gone.
yes, exactly.
Gotta be easy. So I love to talk to people about process. Do you have, online or a piece of paper where as a character's coming in, you're like, not working here, but you are going to be somewhere else. Do you have other story ideas or other, when you're writing that story, it's getting bigger. And you're like, I got to cut this, but I'm not going to lose it. I mean, tell me about
Hmm.
that, about how you sort of settle on what the story is going to be.
Hmm. So yeah, I actually have a notes, like my notes app on my phone as well as on my computer, and I'm always dropping saving things there. I have like an entire just lists and lists of movies that I want to watch that in some way can inform me about my writing, or books that I want to read that can inform me about my writing. And I do the same thing with characters and with ideas. I keep them all in a list, and I've just got page over the years of, and I do draw from them.
Yeah.
If I'm like, oh, I want to come back to that character, and I've done that. I actually did that for this book. There was a short story that I wrote, I guess probably 5 years ago. And I had an editor who was working with me on it. This is when I was first writing. And then I thought, okay, I need an additional story for this book because the story that is in the September, October issue of Ellery Queen, a mystery magazine called Rage Ritual, that got picked up by Ellery Queen. So I'm like, okay, I can't put this in the book now, even though I love that story. Um, and that story came from an idea that I had just written down and linked to it about these basically rage rituals that women do in the wilderness. So it's like, that sounds like a great idea for a story. Um, so I actually came back to a story from a character that I had cut um, and added that to the anthology, just like reworked it and had my critique group read through it. And yeah, so that was, I hadn't seen that character in 5 years.
Yeah.
And she's back again. So now she's in the book.
So, do you talked about working with editors, and I think that's, we talk about that a lot on this podcast as well,
Mhm,
of, nothing's perfect when you send it. Like, you need somebody else to come in and say,
mhm,
you missed here, didn't understand this. Like, who is this character? Like, what did you do?
mhm, mhm,
Um, good critiques, helpful critiques, not
mhm,
this is how you should tell a story, or oh, he shouldn't die at the end. Like, no,
mhm,
that's not the critique. My choice is this. But so
mhm.
talk to me about that, about working with editors and building your craft.
Yeah. So um, I do want to touch a little bit on critiques because I really rely on my critique group because we've been together for 4 years, and so now they really understand my voice. So even they can tell me like that doesn't sound like you.
Yeah.
Like they can actually pinpoint things. But interesting, this is just a little plug that I have an article coming up in Writer's Digest in January, February 2026 about critique groups and protecting your mental health.
Oh,
So I for about 2 months I was deep diving in talking to people about their experiences with critiques from editors or from other critique groups. But to directly address that, I find that you have to find a group or a person who understands, what you're trying to accomplish, and then they can look at it from a distance and say, if your goal is this is what I'm reading, kind of thing, as opposed to that is something that I do address in the article. Anyone who tells you how to write your story, if they give you a critique that just says, I don't like this, that's not a critique, that's an opinion.
Yeah.
Stay away from people who give you opinions unless you asked for their opinion. If you're looking for a critique, it should talk about the craft. It should talk about the sentence structure. It should talk about the pacing. It should talk about the character development.
Mm-hmm.
This character does something that feels, like I wouldn't, expect this character to behave based on what you've already written, that kind of thing. That's a critique, and those can also be really challenging. People,
Mm-hmm.
it can be triggering or whatever. But those are the type of critiques where those are actually meant to help your craft. Saying I
Yeah.
don't like something, or this is dumb, or this person should die, I would have killed this I mean, okay. Thanks for your opinion. That's not helpful.
No, no.
That's not helpful. And so I would say I'm pretty lucky to have worked with people who understand what critiquing is. But I also can say that when I find somebody who doesn't, I immediately protect my mental health. And like, nope, we're not going to be asking them for critiques anymore
Yeah.
because they're not doing it properly for me.
Yeah.
That some of the other people might like tough love. I don't know why. They actually had a critique group where there's one person who would say things like, I guess somebody would like reading this. Like he would say stuff like that. Like, and he was always especially like, rough on certain types of writers. And I think he was rougher on writers who he thought were weaker, quotes, and I'm doing that in quotes, that he could kind of bully.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where every single person, because I already saw this coming, I was already preparing to say, unless you can stick to, because I actually have rules for critique. I'm like, unless you can stick to these rules, this might not be the group for you. Every single person came to me and said, even the ones who he didn't do this to, came and said, I don't like I don't like this. I don't feel comfortable with this. And then that person, I think, saw the writing on the wall and said, yeah, this is probably not the critique group for me, so I'm not going to come into it anymore. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's, so I didn't actually have to, ask them to leave, or I would have asked them to change their ways first,
Mm-hmm.
given the opportunity to be more in line with what the group was about. But yeah, it's very demotivating to writers if you're working with someone who isn't going to help you with your craft, if their feedback isn't going to further your knowledge base. And if it isn't, you do have every right to just not be exposed to them. And that's what my article talks about. You don't have to take everybody's critique if you don't like it. And especially if it's mean spirited.
Yeah.
You're not obligated to be in the presence of that person.
Oh,
Period.
this is something people need to hear. Tell me the title of this article again, so that people can look for it. This
Okay, so
podcast will come out before the article, but you'll all have time to write it down. Say, I'm going to read this article.
yeah, so let me go ahead and quickly give you the title for that one. So this is coming out January, February edition. And the name of, hold on, let me just get the name of the article, is Navigating a Critique Group While Keeping Your Mental Health Intact.
I think that that's such a gift to tell people, and for critique groups who are going to form. It also, you need feedback,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yes.
you're so right in saying if somebody doesn't like genre and
Mm-hmm.
critiques it just because it's genre with a heavier hand or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to help you, and it may damage you, especially early on, or if you're in a vulnerable place in your writing. It's like that can be very damaging.
Yes, it can. It can be, I think, even more damaging than getting rejections
Yeah.
for your writing. It can be even more damaging, because a lot of times people are saying these things to your face,
Yeah.
and they know what they're saying and they know the reaction that they're getting,
Yeah.
and so and especially when you're the moderator of a group, which I am the moderator of a group, it's incumbent upon the moderators to step up and to make sure that the space is safe.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so that's, I mean, that's really important. But yeah, I mean, when I pitched this article to the amazing editor, Amy Jones, I said, I know you get lots of articles on critique groups. I said, I looked them up. I see that Writer Digest has done several of these. I said, but now I haven't seen one where we talk about the mental health toll that it takes on people.
Hmm.
And I have a very dear friend who is a psychologist. So he weighed in from a psychological standpoint, from the perspective of a professional,
Hmm.
as to what he would tell his clients
Hmm.
if someone were coming in and had these types of anxieties.
Hmm.
And so hopefully it will help those, because I think critique groups are really important. And even Stephen King has said he has an editor. He has somebody who critiques his work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
he has somebody who looks at it. So for those who act like I don't need one, even one of the top selling authors in the world has an editor
Yeah.
who looks at their work. And
Yeah.
his book on writing, I do enjoy that book. There's some things in it I don't agree with, that don't fit my lifestyle. I mean, if you have a wife and someone who can take care of certain things for you, there's certain things in the book that make sense. I don't have somebody who's going to, do certain things for me. So it doesn't make sense for me. But he does this really great section where he shows you a couple of paragraphs from a story that is, he'd written, and I can't remember which story it was. And then he shows you where the different updates were, like where he
Hmm.
changed it and stuff like that. So you could kind of see that even when he first writes something, he comes back in and it does get changed.
Yeah.
And that's a part of that process. And I think you're missing a key point if you are not connected to a critique group to help better your writing, but also to have support.
Yes.
That's a really important part for me. It's been an incredibly important part of building a writer's community, is being a part of a critique group.
So let's talk about the need for support. I mean, you're hitting all my favorite themes here: community support. Um, but other people in your life care about you, but they're not going to understand why you're not going outside for 6 hours on a Saturday because you're
Hmm.
deep in the weeds with this story and you got to work on it. Whereas
Hmm.
another writer
Hmm.
will does, and you need people who understand what you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah, I find that, I live about an hour away from my parents. So with the countdown to handing in my manuscript, I said, you will not see me for 2 months, because every weekend I have to, because I my job as it currently is pretty it's pretty involved.
Yeah.
So I don't have time at the end of the evening to really get in a mental space for writing. Sometimes I do,
Mhm.
and I get a couple of things done, but weekends are my time where I have a big chunk of time. And I think at first they're kind of like, well, can you just do it over here? I'm like, no, that's not how this works. So but I handed the manuscript. Now we're back on regular family visits. And so they're all very proud that the book is coming. And I think now they understand, okay, we get kind of now why you were heads down on that. But you may have people in your life who don't understand that. And that's when you will have to kind of just take little nuggets of time for yourself if you're in the carpool lane. I have a friend who, when she's in the carpool lane, she's writing or dictating something so she
Yeah.
can write it down later. If she's in between classes, she's going to write something. And that's when you will have to kind of hopefully get in that mindset that journalists get into. You just write when you can, and you just do it. And my process a little bit more. I need to be in a certain type of headspace, and so I'll get myself ready for that headspace. I mean, that's just me. I
Yeah.
can't just write on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be like really there, and I have to really think about what I want to write. Like, what's the character supposed to be doing right now? I can't just like write free flow. I kind of need a mental outline.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just the idea of making that space and that time, and sometimes your community will be there to help you with that, and sometimes for those, I just want to kind of point out for those who don't have that community, you'll have to steal moments where you can.
Yeah, and a reminder to folks listening to this, Sisters in Crime offers write-ins, which are appointments that you can set for yourself, where for an hour you're going to be writing with other people, but it's for that hour, and that can be helpful just as in the chat before, during, and after. People will talk to each other and build a community that way. So there's a lot of ways to build a community of support of other writers.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about this idea of an interconnected novel with short stories. I think this is fascinating, and it's I've been reading some novels which I would argue are interconnected short stories. They're
Hmm.
just, they're not calling it that. It's a novel because it's
Hmm.
got an overarching, conversation. But talk to me about this idea and putting it together.
I started writing about a particular character, and that short story was published in Dark Yonder, issue number one, the very first issue they've ever had. And I had people ask me about that character, and I thought, yeah, he's an interesting guy. And then thought about it, and then I wrote like another story, and I decided, I think I'll just name this character in this next story with the same surname as the first character. And then I wrote a third story, and my critique group looked at this. Oh, is this the same guy? Are these two related? The two, these two, this guy and this guy, are they related because they have the same last name? And I said, yeah, I guess they might be. So I think I might need to start putting a timeline together or something to kind of figure out because like I just kept using the same name. It just felt kind of like natural to use because they all lived in New Orleans. I'm like, I just kind of like wanted to use the same name.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it all started. And then I did look at, like, I write stories, and I am not necessarily doing a family tree per se, but I am trying to show the theme that there is intergenerational trauma, and that there's an intergenerational kind of link that
Mm-hmm.
people have. And so they might not have the same exact trauma, but sometimes that tree is just another branch of that tree. And that's where the interconnected piece came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, in my critique group, and I know you know this name, Ashley Ruth Bernier.
Mm-hmm.
So she's in my critique group. So she writes interconnected stories. So I've also learned a great deal from reading her stories and how amazing those are. And of course, her stories are much, much different from mine because
Yeah.
mine are so dark, and hers have that very um, unique sense of place because they're set in the Virgin Islands, and such a unique character with Naomi Sinclair. But she's someone that I look at when I'm thinking about interconnected stories. I've read a few works from Elizabeth Stout, who writes interconnected stories. And then actually for the September, October issue of Writer's Digest that's currently out for 2025, I wrote an entire article on interconnected stories. And so and these are based on, I've read authors who've done this. And so in the horror space, Josh Mallerman has an interconnected set of stories that I ended up reading. So it goes across genres as well
Yeah.
when it comes to doing this. But for me specifically, I just really liked this family. I liked how it is a little tortured. This family's a little cheeky. They're a little, you know, hot tempered and, revenge oriented sometimes, but then sometimes it's just very, um, relatable. And so I just kind of started writing about them. So now I've got a set of stories that in some way you'll find either this family, New Orleans, or a fictional town that I made up, a fictitious town I made up called Presage, Louisiana. Um, and a lot of things happen there as well. But all those things kind of come together to make them interconnected.
I love the idea of using that model as a way to investigate intergenerational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as your readers are reading, they may come upon a story that's like, oh, now let me go back. Now I understand. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of rich texture that those can bring you,
Mm-hmm.
give you. Um, and you're right. So many people will write connected short stories, or people whose series have been canceled, they'll revisit the characters in a short story, or if they're in
Mm-hmm.
between and they need to fill in a timeline on a novel, they'll like write
Yes.
the short story that explains. It's like a prologue, or it's something else. It's more for the reader.
Yeah, actually, that's a really great point that I think that people could utilize a little bit more is in between novels, you write a short story or a novella that kind of keeps people up to date, but it can also fill in some gaps, especially once you start writing a series or start writing and you're saying, oh, there is a gap
Yeah.
because you didn't realize obviously that it was coming, and then you find a way to fill that, or you can explore. I like to say you can use interconnected stories to explore side characters. And
Yeah.
so now you're connecting a side character to your main character through a short story or through just another vehicle to deepen the timeline and deepen the lore of what you've already built. So I think that's a good way to use, to make your story interconnected is to use side characters
Yeah.
or events that happen in a story, and then you explore it more.
And it would also make readers happy. It's like they'll know
Hmm.
something that nobody else will know, or they
Hmm.
have a depth of knowledge. So
Yes.
tell me about you're making it sound, oh, and I wrote and this and that, but this is putting this together as a book
Hmm.
must have been just because there's many ways you could do it, right? You could do it chronologically, you can do it theme, you could do it with
Yes.
arc, you can, and as you're writing, it's like, I gotta write a story about because I've got a hole here. Tell me
Hmm.
about putting them together.
Yeah. So I did end up listing the stories in chronological order because they start in Reconstruction,
Mm,
Louisiana. So it starts in the 1880s. And so I actually did. And then there are some stories where I don't specifically tell you the time frame. I'm just letting you know something happens before.
mm-hmm,
So I have like a character who shows up at a bait shop, and it's a shop, so you want to have customers. So this person shows up, and then two stories later, he's the main character of that story. And I allude to two people who were in that story. They come back again in his story. So, I mean, so it's chronological in my eyes, but I don't put dates on anything necessarily. There are some times when I do allude to the time frame. So there's a story set in the 1960s. I allude to um, things that were happening at the time. So the Vietnam War, certain things. So you should know what the time frame is, or the music. You should know what the time frame is based on that. Um, but this entire collection, I would say, took me, it's over a period of 7 years of story
mm-hmm,
writing. And I would say half of them have been published and the other half have not.
yeah.
So there's going to be brand new material. And of course, you would have to buy every anthology I was in and every like Ellery Queen or every whatever. Most people haven't done that. So everything will technically be new to anyone who's reading it. But I feel like a lot of collections come about because after years of writing, you have stories that you haven't said, gotten placed anywhere, but they got really close. Like every single story except for the new one that I just did got very close to being published if it wasn't published.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there were those that were. Um, and so I kind of feel like I have this body of work. What should I do with it? And so it has made sense to put that together. But you'd be surprised at how hard, and I think for writers out there who are listening to this who have been through this before, really hard to sell an anthology. I mean, a collection. It's
Yes.
really challenging.
Yeah.
I had 5 agents who said they loved it, but they couldn't sell it. And they all said, send me something when you have a novel. And I've had other writers say, you had 5 agents? I said, yeah. So I know this book is good. I
Yeah.
feel like in my heart, I've put together something that I can be proud of. Just couldn't sell it to anyone. So I went with with a smaller publisher,
Mm-hmm.
who has been amazing. Incredible to work with. Uncomfortably Dark Horror, just incredibly, great to work with. So for all the writers out there, there's always different options, different ways that you can
Yeah.
make your publishing dreams come true. Um, Obviously, self-publishing. I know several who self-publish, and they have, traditional publishers. There's many ways to do it. But for me, yeah, I mean, after 7 years and all these stories that were ready and I was feeling really good about them, I thought, you know what, let's put them out there.
Well, a couple of things to unpack there. First of all, agents um, love your writing, but they can't sell the book. That's actually they're your business partner, so that's important to know. Rather than
Yes.
sign on for somebody and then they say, "Oh yeah,
Mhm.
that's great knowledge." But also, there are other ways of making the dream come true. You just have to believe and visualize that for yourself because
Mhm.
nobody cares about your writing career as much as you do.
Yes, that is
Nobody.
absolutely yes. There's no one who's more invested in it than you are, and I always feel really, it makes me sad when I am in different forums where people are like, "What do you do if you can't get your family to read your book? What do you do if you can't get, if I can't get my partner, or my spouse to read, my book? Like, what have you done? Like, how do you get them interested?" And it's like, oh, it just feels like, wow, that um, that's when you have to say, sometimes outside validation, like I said, it'd be great to have an agent. That kind of outside validation would be amazing. But I have to believe in this book.
Yeah.
I have to be the one who believes in this. And
Yeah.
that came through with the 2 publishers who wanted it. And then
Yeah.
I was able to choose who I was going to go with. So, I think in some ways I look at that, and I think, um, I was there. I was at that point where I was like, oh, well, I want certain people to read this. And then I got to the point, I'm like, I can't be worried about that. I can't be concerned about that. Either you support me, and people can support you in many different ways. And I think that's the question too, is um when we talk about our writing and our sense of worth and value from it, people can support you in many different ways. They may not want to support you by reading something, but is there some other way are they supporting you in other ways
That's
through
right.
this journey? One of the things that I'm, obviously when you have a book out, there's been a lot of debate about having blurbs and having other people say something nice about your book. And I'm just like, I just feel like, either somebody will do it or not, but I always tell them, or if there's another way that you can think of to support me that you'd be happy to do, let me know. Doesn't have
Right.
to be a blurb.
Yeah.
And if it's just, amplifying my social media, like, oh, I'd be more comfortable amplifying your social media, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I feel like we need to kind of expand what success looks like, and we need to expand what support looks like.
Yes. Yes.
And, yeah.
So when you wrote this book, I'm going to just keep going back to, if a story had been published before,
Hmm.
did you look at it again? And did you think about transitions that you might need or a sentence you might need in order to bring the story, to connect them even more?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yes, because um, even if something has been published before and you're putting together your own collection, for all those out there who might have short stories and are thinking, I could just write 3 more stories and I'll have a collection.
Yeah.
Do it. First of all, do it. And when you do this, just because something's been published before does not mean you can't change it, because yes, I did. I would
Yeah.
go back in and I think, let me add a little connective tissue here, or even just like, I like this other sentence. Let me just change this sentence. I like it better this way now.
Yeah.
And I just went in and spent like a week going through every story, making changes, updating things without a care to whether or not it'd been published. There are certain stories that I just loved the way they were when they were published, and so I did not touch them.
Yeah.
But everything was fair game.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I definitely, you can feel comfortable doing that. And you can still, I mean, and you still get to say that it was published somewhere else, but you do have the autonomy to go in and make updates, and especially if you're doing something that's interconnected. If you're just doing something by theme, perhaps you don't have to worry about the transitions. But yeah, if you're thinking about an interconnected collection, it's always good to look at them. But yeah, you can go in and change whatever you want.
Even the theme. I mean, you're a better writer. The more you write, you're a better writer. You might have had a story that was perfect, and don't touch
Mhm,
that one. But
mhm,
in general, story you wrote 5 years ago, you could say, gosh, I'm gonna make this nicer. I'm gonna
mhm.
fix this sentence.
Yeah, actually, I had a story that the one I was referring to that I added to the collection. Technology changed since the time I wrote it.
Mm.
So now when I wrote it, what wasn't something that was happening then or possible actually is possible now. So I was able to write it into the story. And actually, my critique group was the one who's like, if I were reading this and I've got, teenagers, the first thing they're going to say is, was it a deep fake, or was it this? And I said, oh, you're right. I should probably, yeah, because what I'm actually referring to does sound like a deep fake, even though we're not sure that's what it is. But yeah, the technology at the time when I first wrote it, people are like, that's not possible. Now it is possible to do really good deep fakes. But when I first wrote it, they're like, that's not how it works. That's not how videos works. It wasn't, but now it is.
And now it really is.
Mm-hmm.
So you set yourself this goal. You've been working on this book. What's the next goal, or what's the, I'm not gonna say, are you going to continue? Obviously, you're going to continue to write short stories, and
Mm-hmm.
but you're thinking about other genres, or you're sticking with, talk to me about
Mm-hmm.
setting the next goal.
Yeah, so actually, I am going to continue writing short stories. I've thought about, because of my Louisiana background, I had done some nonfiction reading about Marie Laveau, and within that book, they talk about all of the kind of spells that are attributed to her. And I thought, oh, that would be great to make a short story collection based on, like, there's spells for making somebody come home, or making someone not leave, or
Uh,
for getting money, or for good health. And you know how the just many ways those can go wrong, right? They're meant to go wrong, right? And so I thought, oh, I could write an entire collection based on these spells, and put something like that together. And that's where I was also thinking I can just do any genre. It could be horror, it could be mystery, it could be
yeah.
sci-fi. And so for that collection, I'm thinking of that's already on the table. So I'm already kind of deciding what I want to write. So that's something that's on the table. And then I have 3 novellas that are in the works. And so I just really need to, 2 of them are very close to being finished. So I'm like, well, let me just go ahead and horror right now, novellas are very popular. So I'm like, and they're both horror. So I'm like, well, this is a good time, since novellas are very, the market's really open to them, and publishers
Yeah.
are really open to them. Getting those, nice and cleaned up by the end of the year. and start pitching those next year. So I have, all kinds of things that are getting ready or almost ready. And that way I have something else to pitch when the book comes out. There's this, the marketer in me is saying, have something else that's about to be available so you have more than one thing to talk about.
Well, the novella length, I have novelist friends who would love to write novellas because it's that next 30,000 words that are like, oh, please. Can I write a 30,000 word novella? That's my sweet spot. And I can't help but think with so many publishers going digital first, and their, pricing structures being a little bit more fluid around that. If novellas aren't going to have a resurgence, because also for readers, it's a night or, a 2 night. It's not as much of an investment. Reading time. It is emotionally and everything else. But I think it's wonderful to think about novellas. And again, I think that everything is changing right now. Everything. So why not explore that medium? And gosh, I would know so many really happy people who would be like, yes, let me write a novella.
Yeah, well, you have people like King T. Fisher, T. Kingfisher, who is very well known for her novellas. She does incredibly well. I have 2 of them, so like I'm a fan. I just kind of feel like it's. I know that's another one where people are like, "Well, it's really hard to sell them." Yeah, but I see a lot of them, and I see a lot of them from publishers. So stop. I almost feel like it's like with short story collections. Like I can't really sell this, but I'm like, I have so many short story collections from like a specific author. I'm like, I see them a lot. It just what I'm seeing and the perception of whether or not these are popular, I think are different. I think novellas are definitely people who read novellas love reading novellas. It's kind of like if you love reading romance, well, then you're going to be giving people romance. I feel like there's a lot of horror people who love reading novellas. There's a market.
Yes, absolutely.
And I will introduce something into that market. There's a market for it.
Well, that's your marketer's brain too. You're seeing the trend. You're seeing the next steps, and publishing doesn't always think that quickly.
That's a good point.
So you're trend setting, which is always hard, but you're doing it. I want to hit on one more thing before we wrap this up, because it's been a great conversation. But and it could go on for hours, but it's not going to. You've talked about writing at different historical periods. Now, again, just for folks listening, short stories are work, and the research is still the research. It's not that informs it to give it, veracity as you're reading it. Talk to me about that historical research and the context, because that's another skill set that's really hard.
Yeah. So for the collection coming out, Things Are As They Should Be, In Other Words to Die For, like I said, it starts in the 1800s. And I did do research on that. So it took me a while. The very first story is called Society. And it took me a while to write it because I kept going down a rabbit hole of research. And at some point, you have to just write the story. But because I was talking about New Orleans at the Reconstruction period, when there were free slaves, but also free people, trying to make that distinction, making distinction of what actually is a Creole, making that distinction. And there were some really interesting historical information I found out about inheritance laws. So that comes into play in this time period, as well as an outbreak. I think it was an outbreak of cholera, but that comes into play because that was happening because I came across that when I was reading. I was like, oh, I could, let me add that in. So there's some elements of that in there. And I had to definitely do research for that. There's a book that I'm in right now, it just came out, called The Most Dangerous Games. And that's a book. I have a short story called Double Dutch Dare. And it's set in 1980s New Orleans. So I had to do some research, even though I was obviously alive in 1980s, but I wasn't a 9-year-old. and
Right.
so, and just, trying to understanding what that looked like. So I had actually did research then to find out what double dutch was at that time, because I knew what it was from growing up. But just trying to find out, like, just even the clothing of the period,
Yeah. Yeah.
that type of thing. So historical research should inform how your story goes. It's still, if it's a fictional story, I want people to be careful about fictionalizing real events or fictionalizing real time periods in which there was maybe some upheaval,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to be, more accurate to the time. But also, you can't let the research take you down a hole where you can't write anything. Like, again, like I have my OneNote and I have all kinds of articles and I have everything kind of put together in my tabs, on my search engine, so I can find things again. But I do a lot of historical research, especially because I'm writing. Like, I have a story set in the 1880s, one set in the 1960s,
Mm-hmm.
one set in the 1980s, one set in the 1990s. And, even though I was alive during some of those, and I would say a sentient, like I was an adult, or I was like aware enough, I still need to look back and just make sure, what was the music back then? Because you mix up
Right.
time frames sometimes.
Right.
And so, because I always love when people are like, that song, if it's in a movie and that movie was set in 1972, that song didn't come out until 1974. I was like, I get it. The song sounded good in that spot in the movie. That's why they used it. It was close
Yeah.
enough, right? But I tried to make sure I was accurate in that sense, because people from New Orleans are going to read this book, and I don't want them to, call out that, that's not accurate. That's not right.
Right.
If it's something that's supposed to be like, there's one where I talk about the A&P at the corner of a certain street. I know that A&P was there in the 1960s because my dad, as a teenager, worked at it, and he's talked to me about it. So I know that was there. But if I put, another store there, there are people who'll be like, that wasn't the store that was there.
Right.
If you're
Right.
talking about a real place, like when I talk about Presage, it's not a real place, so I can make it do anything I want. But New Orleans,
Yeah.
you got to be accurate about what streets things are on. If you're using a real thing, you cannot get that wrong. And I think a lot of times people take liberties, and people will call you out on that.
Yeah, it
So,
takes them out of the story. And people
yes.
who like to read historical fiction really care about what
Hmm.
that
Yes, they do.
airbrush from 1993 look like, and
Yeah.
they really care. But
Yeah.
the other thing that you brought up was that I'm interpolating, but don't assume because even if you were alive, if you're writing from a different point
Hmm.
of view, you're writing from a different place, you're writing from a different gender. I mean, don't assume you need to do research in order
Hmm.
to make sure you're being as accurate as possible,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yes, definitely.
And memories are selective. I'm sure you have this. I have members in my
Mhm.
family where, like, my sister and I are 14 months apart. We have completely different memories from our childhood.
Yes.
Completely.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's also true.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about the book. I'm excited for you about the book. I'm also
Hmm.
excited about the news about novellas. I mean, let's
Hmm.
start a trend
Yes.
here because that would be fabulous. Um,
Absolutely.
and thank you so much, Pam, for being on the podcast this week.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for being with us today. Sisters in Crime is about community. We were founded to advocate for women crime writers, and we continue that mission by fighting for equity in the crime writing community. Sisters in Crime is an international, inclusive organization for all who write and love crime fiction, mystery, thrillers, and suspense. Join us at sistersincrime.org and make sure you subscribe to this podcast.